Hi, everyone, and thank you for joining Compliance in a False Sense of Security. We're just going to give a couple more minutes for some more folks to join, so just stand by. We're going to get started in about 2 minutes. Okay, and thank you everyone for joining Compliance in a False Sense of Security. My name is Lisa Mokaba, and I'm the Communications Director here at Capsule 8. I'm joined by Cynthia Burke, a Program Manager here at Capsule 8. Cynthia brings more than 15 years of IT and Program Manager experience to our team. And prior to joining Capsule 8, Cynthia was an Assistant Director and Program Manager with KPMG's International Audit Division, leading projects to develop KPMG's audit collaboration tools. Today, Cynthia will explain the unique challenges of compliance in this new cloud-native world, as well as share best practices for not only meeting compliance standards, but truly protecting your production environment. Before I turn it over to Cynthia, a few housekeeping items. One, if you have any questions, please do type them into the Q&A box provided, and we will try to get to all of them at the conclusion of the webcast. Also, this webcast will be available on demand, so we'll send a link over once it's ready to go. And without further ado, I'm going to kick it over to Cynthia to get us started.
Thank you, Lisa, and thanks everyone for joining today. We are here to talk about some major challenges most of us are facing when we are considering the move to cloud native, or if we're already in a cloud native world. To be specific, cloud native, when I speak of this, I'm talking strictly about microservice-oriented, containerized environments that are leveraging dynamic orchestration. These new tools, this new way of doing business definitely brings complexity to enterprise infrastructure. Challenges with asset management, the convergence of development, security and operations, and data decentralization are all things that we're trying to wrap our arms around. At the same time, few industry design frameworks are available to achieve security, let alone compliant cloud native architectures. So we find ourselves having to look at the either or opportunities. Either we're shopping for security tools or we're having to check compliance checkboxes. Why is this? It's because the legacy tools that we've come to rely upon to satisfy compliance or security often fall short in cloud native environments. So we find ourselves adding tools to the toolbox, which can be costly and difficult to scale. We can also, as we add more and more tools to check more and more compliance checkboxes or batten down the systems, we're generating more telemetry, we're generating more alerts. And with that alert fatigue, we could actually end up detracting from securing our infrastructures. So how did we get here? It's difficult to see paradigm shifts when we're in the middle of them, but I'm afraid we are. You know, in the early 90s, we talked about IT security almost as an afterthought. There was little to no consistency, and protection really boiled down to firewalls and antivirus. By the early 2000s, we start to hear about incorporating security into the enterprise architecture process as a best practice. We start hearing about service-oriented architectures, which was really just sophisticated middleware, or enterprise service buses that handled integration, security, and exposing web services. Now, at the same time, we start seeing some of the we start seeing massive data breaches for the first time. In 2007, there were 446 data breaches in the US alone, exposing 127 million records. But we keep going. We start hearing about software, platform, infrastructures as a service. They're buzzwords, but the cloud to most organizations is not yet something reliable. Few subject matter experts exist, and in service-oriented architectures continues to be the approach of most organizations. And at the same time, we start seeing more and more breaches, 662 in 2010, exposing 16.2 million records. Now, I think the disparity we're seeing here in terms of record exposure really speaks to the fact that, you know, in early 2010, we are not putting a lot of personal data yet, at least not to the magnitude we're seeing today, on the cloud. By 2018, there's 1,244 data breaches in the US, exposing 446 million records. But at the same time, we've been talking about getting to the cloud for some time. Our budgets are running out, we need to use it or lose it. And so we're starting to embrace microservices, containerization, and dynamic endpoints. It takes over the enterprise. Software-defined networking, we can no longer rely on perimeter security to provide trusted environments. We have to assume that all parts of the network are untrusted and that the endpoint itself is where we must establish the trust. We want all the benefits of cloud native. We want resiliency. We want distributed data. We want to have a loose coupling of infrastructure, and we want the cost effectiveness of that scale. But with it, we have challenges. We don't have, there are few industry standards and designs acceptable for cloud native. We have endless endpoints. We have compliance nightmares on an increasingly complex and more tightly regulated system. And if we are relying on our traditional best of breed compliance tools, it literally may cost you. You know, in the Cloud Native Computing Foundation between 2017 and 18 reported something like between 50 plus members. In 2019, and we're just in June, this Cloud Native Computing Foundation surpassed 375 members. People are going to cloud native. At the same time, in 2018, key regulatory implementation dates hit. In early January 2018, Financial Instruments Directive comes down, Financial Instruments Regulation comes down. By mid-January, the revised Payment Services Directive becomes in effect. And in May of 2018, the General Data Protection Regulation goes into effect, otherwise known as GDPR. So what happens? Cloud Security Alliance did a survey just this year, and 700 IT and security professionals agree security and compliance continue to be the primary obstacles to cloud native adoption. There's a lot of positive going cloud native, but it creates challenges in terms of configuration and visibility. There are legal concerns. We certainly see the headlines daily, and human error continues to be the biggest cause of outages. the subject matter expertise just isn't there. We have to start moving away from a large number of disparate tools to check compliance checkboxes to strategies which both protect and meet compliance standards. We have what I like to call a perfect storm. We have cloud native proliferation. At the same time, we have increased regulation. And at the same time, we don't have that framework quite yet. We want the resiliency. We want the microservices, the portability, the distributed data. But it increases the attack surface. It creates visibility challenges, and the tools that we know for intrusion detection and prevention, data loss prevention, access control monitoring, they just don't fit perfectly in a cloud native world. So it really is a new paradigm. We're looking at new layered security controls, which must integrate with existing tools, and a move away from remediation-centric tools to proactive controls, which meet both security and compliance objectives. You know, the regulators too are also trying to keep pace, essentially building the cars they drive. At its core, regulation is trying to protect citizens and promote competition. The best regulatory model to use, well, it's being reviewed constantly. There's the heavy precautionary regulation on one end, and then the little to no regulation on the other. So traditionally, regulators conceptualized new rules and regulations in response to market developments or legislation. It's been adaptive, but there are accelerators, and cloud native is one of them. So we're seeing regulators move away from the regulate and forget to iterative compliance standards. In the past, regulations or regulators themselves tended to be prescriptive and focused on inputs. We're really seeing a shift to outcome-based regulation, moving more towards objectives rather than defining the way in which they must be achieved. We're seeing the use of sandboxes, trying out different approaches. We're also seeing collaboration among regulators. The U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission and the European Commission are collaborating. The one-size-fits-all for regulation to data-driven is the new normal. So my suggestion to you today is to embrace the paradigm shift. We are seeing the cloud native adoption. We're going there. It's happening. We're seeing it at a rate we have not yet seen to date, despite the challenges of compliance and security. Take this opportunity to review organizational structures, processes, and tools, as well as the compliance measures you're taking today, and iterate, just like the regulators, and just like you have approached most of your product development probably within your organization. So we'll dig in a little bit here and talk specifically about some suggestions for obtaining both a compliant and secure cloud native enterprise. Start with building the foundation. Certainly, it's a brave new world in terms of working with microservices and containers for some organizations. So this is the time to step back and build a solid foundation. Start with the containers images themselves. One of the good things here is that they can be rebuilt often. We can scan for vulnerabilities at build. We can keep them patched and current, and we can update as threat landscapes change. We can leverage container registry vulnerability scanning. There's a lot of tools. Most of the major cloud service providers have this ability, and we can monitor for assets managed by clouds or other service providers. A lot of the big breaches that we've seen recently come down to open storage buckets, credential compromises by developers, and overall just poor storage policy. We can start to, at the foundation, stop a non-compliant or an insecure image from even being deployed. And we can start doing this by using a container-specific host operating system. So this is a minimal OS used only to run containers that's hardened, set to read only, and extraneous services are disabled. When we are evaluating tools, when you need to add tools to this, my primary takeaway I want here is look for integration points. Does data display in existing tools, like ELK, for example? Reduce the learning curve for your existing staff, and make sure the tools that you do obtain have adequate reporting. Make sure that you're able to provide audit evidence if needed. Organize your containers to increase your visibility in terms of asset inventory. Leverage asset tagging. Group containers together with the same purpose, the same sensitivity in terms of data, and the same threat posture on a single host kernel. Segmenting containers by purpose and sensitivity and threat posture adds an additional level of defense and depth. It also sets you up to automate some of the compliance-driven configurations we'll talk about here in a moment, and further enables data sensitivity classification, which is a key objective of GDPR. Use this opportunity to bake in compliance. Oh, I think I lost one. Yep, this is actually one of the key areas. Leverage your in-house subject matter experts. Get the teams talking. Combine the situational awareness of security officers with the operational and development teams to define adequate design, implementation, and response actions, and get them involved early. Effective compliance and security are fundamentally linked to automating workflows and using system tools effectively and bubbling critical system events to the surface as quickly as possible. And educate your teams to focus on container-specific vulnerability management tools or microservice-specific tools. This is a new world. There's a lot of tools available from Amazon, from Azure, from Google, that take both the software vulnerabilities and configuration settings into account. And above all, use this opportunity as you move to cloud native to bake in compliance. The traditional intrusion protection and prevention and web application firewalls are often not container aware at runtime. They may not be able to operate at the scale of containers, and they may not be able to manage the rate of change in a container environment, or even have the visibility into containers. Leverage the metadata that is available to you in this new world. Consider building compliance attestation into the images themselves. So as an example, I may have a workload that I know is going to be working with protected health information. Build a HIPAA compliant base image. I know that I'm going to have a workload that is dealing or going to be held to PCI standards. Build a PCI compliant image. It sounds simple, but starting with that foundation actually will help achieve compliance faster, and with the right tools in place, you can produce audit evidence on the fly. So organizations really should adopt tools and processes to validate and enforce compliance and secure configuration best practices in the images themselves. This should include having centralized reporting, monitoring of the compliance state for each image, and preventing non-compliant images from even being run. There's also opportunities here to solve certain challenging compliance requirements in GDPR specifically, as an example. You can connect cloud workloads to on-prem databases, allowing the benefits of the cloud while adhering to GDPR, as an example. So, in summary, Robert Smith very aptly said in 1984, you have to adapt or you'll be out of style. My suggestion to you is to never take an either or approach when selecting tools for compliance or security. Look for tools that integrate and you can iterate and retune as needed. Get your teams talking, collaborate among teams. We can expect regulators are having to meet regularly and revise as needed as the threat landscape changes. And we're going to have to be able to respond and retune our images and our infrastructures to meet those challenges. The ever-shifting regulatory requirements and the ever-shifting security threats, this is our new normal. There's a lot of opportunity to capitalize on new processes, new tools, new procedures in the cloud-native world. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much, Cynthia. As I mentioned at the beginning, feel free to type any questions into the question box. We do have a little bit of time to go through some questions, so I do have one. First question is, this focuses pretty specifically on containers. Do the same practices hold true for hybrid environments?
Thanks, Lisa. Yes and no. Well, certainly in terms of some of the suggestions here about integration, collaboration, and the ability to retune, absolutely. And certainly the idea that some of our traditional tools that we've come to rely on don't necessarily fit in cloud native. Now, most organizations that I know and work with are somewhere in between, right? They may be moving to a purely cloud native, and they may be in a hybrid state or a private cloud. And certainly this idea that we really are in a paradigm shift. We're at a time where regulation is becoming more and more stringent. New tools and new architectures are starting to evolve. At the same time, we seem to have more and more high-profile breaches that we have to change our organizational structures as well as our tools. That certainly applies.
Great. So I think that's all the time we have for today. Thank you everyone for joining us. This concludes today's webcast. We hope you all found it valuable. And if you have any further questions, please do feel free to reach out to us at info@capsulate.com and we will get back to you right away. Thank you again for joining us and keep an eye out for that recording. We'll talk to you soon.